Her laughter sounded like forgiveness until I felt the burn in my throat. It was Christmas again, and the house was dressed in every color, pretending not to fade. I'm Margaret, 53 years old, once a wife, now a host to ghosts who still insist on sitting at my table. The pine scent clung to the curtains. The old clock hummed above the mantel, and I kept smiling, arranging cutlery as if order could keep love from breaking. I told myself this year would be different. This year, no one would flinch when I raised a toast. My daughter poured the tea, her bracelet clinking like a little bell. "To new beginnings," she said, eyes flicking toward her father. He smiled, a curve I once trusted. The taste touched my tongue, sweet at first, then bitter, a strange metallic note beneath the sugar. I looked up at her, at them both, and the world felt 2 shades colder. "Is it too strong?" she asked, voice light, almost innocent. "No," I whispered, "just surprising." Around us, the candles softened every edge. The warmth pretended to stay. My hands trembled as I reached for the photo frame beside the table, the one from last Christmas, when her laughter still felt like home. I noticed the glass, a faint crack running down the center, splitting us apart even in memory. The clock struck 8. Its chime echoed through the silence like a question no one wanted to answer. My throat tightened. I reached for water, but the jug was empty. The taste still lingered. Wrong. Too sharp to be mistake or spice. My husband leaned forward. "You look pale, Maggie. Maybe you should sit down." "I am sitting." He looked away, almost relieved. She stood, gathering plates that didn't need gathering. Their voices blurred, low and hurried. I heard one word, signed. Another, tonight. My heart began to count differently, not seconds, but lies. I tried to steady myself with breath and memory. The scent of pine, the gleam of the silver clock, the gentle hum of the heater, all familiar guardians suddenly useless. The room shimmered, or maybe I did. "Mom?" Her voice reached me again, softer now. "Do you forgive me for everything?" "For what?" She smiled too easily. "For the past, for being difficult." The words tasted like the tea, sweetness masking something sour. I wanted to stand, to clear the table, to reclaim my own house. But my legs refused. The floor tilted like a decision already made. "I just need a moment," I murmured. The cup slipped from my hand, rolling toward the photo frame. Tea spread across the tablecloth, staining the white like a confession. The warmth vanished from the room, replaced by the cold shine of polished metal. The cutlery reflecting my daughter's face as she froze. My husband rose first. "Call someone," he said, but his tone lacked urgency. She didn't move, just watched. The air thickened with the scent of smoke from an overworked candle, and for an instant everything slowed. The clock's tick, the flicker of light, the silence that followed my breath leaving. In that silence I thought of all the times I had chosen peace over truth, of every apology I had served alongside dinner. I thought of her small hands learning to stir sugar into tea, the ritual we'd built from comfort. Now comfort was poison. Outside, a neighbor's dog barked once, then again breaking the stillness. I tried to speak, to say her name, but the word died somewhere between fear and love. My head touched the table, the crack in the photoglass gleaming beside me, catching the light like a wound. I heard them whisper, too low for words, too clear for trust. Then footsteps, then nothing. When the world returned, it came through sirens and strangers. Someone must have called, though not them. Paramedics stepped through the open door, their radios muttering numbers I couldn't place. The scent of pine was gone. All I could taste was the tea, metallic and final. As they lifted me, the photo frame slid from the table and shattered completely. The image split, my smile on one side, hers on the other. The sweetness on my tongue was deceit. They cleaned the mess, but left the table for proof. When I opened my eyes, The first thing I saw wasn't light. It was white. White walls, white sheets, white silence. Hospitals have a way of erasing color, as if grief itself must be sterilized. I didn't know how long I had been there, only that the clock on the far wall refused to move. The faint hum of a monitor kept time instead. Someone said my name. I turned toward the sound and saw her, my daughter, smiling too quickly, like someone rehearsing kindness. "You gave us quite a scare," she said. Her tone made it sound like inconvenience, not fear. "They said it was just bad tea, nothing serious. Just bad tea." The phrase slipped into me like another dose. I looked at her hands. No tremor, no guilt, only control. "Did you call them?" I asked. "Of course. We stayed until they said you'd be fine." She glanced toward the door, her eyes darting like birds avoiding windows. "Dad said to rest. You always worry too much." A nurse entered, tall, quiet, purposeful. She adjusted the IV without meeting my gaze, then placed a folded slip of paper beneath my hand. "Results will come later," she murmured, almost to herself. Then she was gone. I waited until the door clicked shut before opening it. 3 words, written in a slanted hand. "Private tests ordered. Keep quiet." The light above flickered. I watched its glare spread across the metal rail of the bed, too sharp to bear. The brightness felt like interrogation, not healing. Later the doctor came in. His voice was warm but hollow, like it had been emptied and filled again with protocol. "Good news," he said. "We didn't find anything alarming. Sometimes stress mimics poisoning symptoms. The mind can trick the body." "The mind," I repeated. "So it wasn't real?" He smiled with practiced pity. "It's real to you, of course. Try to rest. The holidays can be emotional." Emotional. A word meant to close doors. When he left, I stared at the wall until I could almost see the outline of my dining room, the white tablecloth still stained, the photo frame cracked, the empty chair where my daughter had sat. In my mind, the scene replayed perfectly, every sound a confession, the cup tipping, the silence following. The nurse returned later with my discharge papers. Her eyes caught mine for half a second. "You'll be home soon," she whispered. "Be careful." "I don't understand." "Sometimes," she said softly, "truth gets labeled as hysteria." The words stayed long after she left. I folded the papers and noticed one small detail. The hospital's printed date, December 26th, the day after Christmas, the day they rewrote what happened. That night, when the room fell quiet, I switched off the lamp. The afterglow clung to the walls before fading, and I thought of that same light on our dining table, reflecting off silver spoons and deception. I whispered to no one. "You cleaned the mess, but left the table." Outside, a cart rattled down the corridor, its wheels squealing like distant laughter. I counted each pass, 1, 2, 3, until the sound disappeared. Even noise felt staged here, like part of a show meant to keep me calm. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face leaning over me, the smile just before the taste turned bitter. "Bad tea," she had said. The words circled the dark like moths around a flame. When morning came, sunlight pressed through the blinds, harsh and bright. The nurse's note was still beneath my pillow, creased and smudged with fingerprints that weren't mine. I stared at it until the edges blurred. I didn't know who to trust anymore. Not the doctors, not the reports, not even the reflection staring back from the chrome IV pole. It all felt rehearsed, like a family portrait redrawn by strangers. They would send me home soon, back to the place where love had curdled. I would walk into that kitchen, see the same table, the same chairs, and know the proof had never left. It had just changed form. Even truth had a visitor's badge. Every silence had a draft that carried their lies. When I came back from the hospital, the air in the house felt altered. Too careful, too rehearsed. Even the way the curtains swayed seemed suspicious. I closed every window, but still the wind found a way in. I began to listen differently. Each creak of wood, each hum of the refrigerator sounded like someone breathing in the next room. The clock ticked too loudly, as if marking secrets instead of time. The quiet between those ticks felt alive, watching me. That's when I hid the small recorder behind the drapes. It was barely bigger than my thumb, tucked between the folds where light never reached. The moment I pressed record, the act itself felt like confession. I wasn't just trying to prove something. I was trying to survive the gaslight that told me nothing was wrong. At night, their voices drifted through the hallway. "She's still weak," one said. "We should handle the papers soon." Another voice, familiar, heavier, answered, "She won't question it. She never does." I froze, holding my breath, afraid the sound of my heartbeat would overwrite theirs. Later, I played it back through my headphones. Static first, then laughter, hers, then his, quieter, measured. My daughter's tone had changed. It carried command now, not affection. "She signed it last year," she whispered. "All we need is the confirmation." "Do it quickly," he said, "before she thinks too much." My throat tightened. I rewound the clip 3 times just to hear the certainty in his voice. The man who had once promised protection, now plotting compliance. The next morning, I couldn't stand the sight of the table. Every polished surface reflected guilt. I spent an hour cleaning nothing, wiping at spotless counters, trying to erase the residue of betrayal. The curtains moved again, the same motion, the same whisper of air. I thought of the hospital, how the nurse had warned me. Sometimes truth gets labeled as hysteria. Maybe she'd known more than she could say. By noon, I walked to the neighbor's house. She had lived next door for 20 years, the kind of person who saw everything, but spoke only when asked. She greeted me with worry in her eyes. "You're pale again," she said. "Are you all right?" "I need a favor," I told her. "Just listen." I played the recording. She leaned forward, her expression tightening. "That's her voice," she said, "and his." I nodded. "Will you be my witness if I need one?" She hesitated, then sighed. "If this goes wrong, they'll say you're unstable. Be careful." "I don't care what they say anymore," I whispered. "I just want the truth." That night, I added another recorder, this time near the kitchen. I labeled the first file, Audio Reference 9A3F, saving it onto a flash drive. I hid inside the bread tin. The irony made me laugh, bitterly, feeding on lies while hiding proof beside what should have sustained us. The house creaked again, louder this time. I could almost imagine the walls leaning in to listen. I drew the curtains shut, sealing the room in shadow, and whispered into the darkness, "If you can hear me, I hear you too." For the next few days, I lived by sound. I measured their deceit in footsteps, in murmurs, in doors that closed too gently. I learned the rhythm of their lies until it became almost musical. Then one evening, as I stood in the hallway, my daughter called out from the kitchen, "You've been so quiet lately." "Listening," I said softly. She smiled, a small, dangerous thing. "To what?" I met her eyes and replied, "Everything that matters." Her smile faltered, but only for a moment. She turned away, humming as if the world were still ordinary. That night, I sat alone beside the recorder, the red light blinking like a pulse. I played the file again, memorizing every syllable. Each sound was a blade, sharp with proof and pain. I wrote a note to myself. Call the police. Ask for a record entry, even if they don't believe you. The next morning, I walked to the precinct. The officer behind the counter barely looked up. "You have evidence?" "Yes," I said. "An audio recording." "Then file an official complaint," he replied. "We don't open cases on family disputes." Family disputes. The words felt like a verdict without trial. I turned and left, my hands shaking. Back home, I pressed play again, over and over, until I knew every pause by heart. The silence between their words was the cruelest part. It was where the love used to live. Their voices called me delusional in my own home. I found my own name, rewritten in another's hand. The screen glowed in the dim light of my living room, numbers and letters shaping into betrayal. I wasn't meant to see it. An email about an account update, accidentally copied to me. Curiosity led to the portal. One click opened a world I didn't recognize, though it wore my name like a stolen coat. There it was, a joint account created 3 months ago under my credentials. $48,200 moved through it in neat monthly transfers. $16,000, $18,000, $14,200. Clean, organized theft disguised as administration. My throat went dry. The cursor blinked beside my name, patient and cruel, as if asking, "Do you see it now?" The pen she had borrowed last summer flashed in my mind, the blue one I used for checks. She joked about my old-fashioned signatures. Now I could see them mimicked perfectly, down to the curl of the G and the pressure point under the M. But there was something missing. A pulse. I printed the document, the paper warm beneath my fingers. The texture of deceit, smooth where it should have trembled. I touched my own name and felt nothing. That night I called a friend from years ago, a quiet, meticulous paralegal who had once helped me finalize my separation. "I need your eyes," I said, "not your sympathy." He met me the next morning, briefcase in hand, calm as always. We sat across from each other in the old legal office downtown, the kind that smelled faintly of dust and ink. He read in silence for a long minute. "This signature," he said finally, "it's you, but it's not. The stroke pressure changes halfway through. Notice here, the lift before the loop? That's not hesitation, that's mimicry." "How? Certain?" 99%. Whoever did this copied you from muscle memory, not habit." I swallowed the bitterness rising in my throat. "Can you file it quietly? I need this time-stamped, no noise, no escalation yet." He nodded. "I'll mark it as reference D7K for internal record. You'll have an affidavit by Friday." As he wrote, the pen scratched softly against the paper. I watched the movement, hypnotized by how ink could change everything, how a single line could erase trust. He paused, looking up at me. "Do you want me to contact the bank directly?" "Not yet," I said. "If they think I'm ignorant, they'll act bolder. I want to see how far they'll go." He frowned. "You're playing patient with predators." "I've lived with worse," I replied. "I can wait." After he left, I sat in the waiting area for a long time, watching envelopes slide into the outgoing bin. Every one of them looked harmless, sealed and polite, until you remembered what paper could hold. Lies, confessions, endings. Outside, the air was sharp with winter. The December wind cut through my coat as I clutched the folder against my chest. Somewhere in that cold, I felt the shape of her motive forming. Not greed alone, but desperation. A debt unpaid, a partner's failure. My blood turned to currency. That night, I opened the account again. The login accepted me too easily. I clicked through transaction histories, and there, transfers marked investment withdrawal, business loan payment, partner expense. Each one automated, each one traceable. I whispered into the quiet room, "You used my name to clean your mistakes." The screen dimmed as if ashamed. I saved the statement, naming it Bank Statement Reference D7K, then slid it into an envelope alongside my will. The act steadied me. I was no longer lost in shock. I was collecting truth. My phone buzzed with a message from her. "Hope you're resting, Mom. Love you." I stared at the words for a full minute. They looked sincere, even loving, typed by the same hands that had forged my trust. I didn't respond. The clock read 9:47 p.m. I added a note to my calendar. December 29th, affidavit notarized. Each number felt heavier than the last, proof weighted by ink and intent. My house was silent, except for the faint crackle of the heater. I ran my fingers along the edge of the printed page, its texture rough now, crinkled where my grip had tightened. I folded it neatly, slipped it into the envelope, and sealed it shut. "You taught me to sign my name proudly," I whispered, "and now you've turned it into a weapon." The lamp flickered once, its glow trembling across the wall like a pulse losing rhythm. Her signature had my loops, but none of my mercy. Reflection became rehearsal for confrontation. The mirror across from me held nothing I wanted to see, only fragments, rearranged by time and guilt. The candle on the table flickered, its flame bending like it was tired of standing straight. I'd come here to talk, but therapy rooms have a way of peeling the silence off your skin before you speak. "It's not about forgiveness," she said gently. "It's about boundaries." The word sounded foreign, like a luxury item I'd never been allowed to own. I looked down at my hands, folded neatly, obedient as always. "I've spent years saying yes," I told her. "To peace, to family, to pretending. I thought keeping things calm meant keeping them whole." "And what did it cost you?" "Everything," I said. "And still they ask for more." The light caught the side of the mirror, breaking into narrow shards that stretched across the wall. It reminded me of the Christmas lights that had blurred before I fell, the moment my throat burned, the sound of her laughter. The memory rose like smoke, and I let it fill the space between us. She handed me a notepad. "Write down one sentence," she said. "Something you wish you had said." I hesitated, then wrote, "You don't get to use my love as permission." Her eyes softened. "Now say it aloud." My voice shook at first, but the words gained weight as they left me. The candlelight trembled in rhythm with my breath. "You don't get to use my love as permission." In the reflection, I looked older, not by years, but by truth. For the first time, I saw the woman who had survived, not the one who had been silenced. The therapist leaned forward. "You have every right to withdraw consent, financial, emotional, all of it. You're not punishing her. You're protecting yourself." Protecting myself. The phrase felt strange, indulgent even, as if I had to justify breathing. When I left her office, she handed me a printed copy of the session summary. Therapy note reference C12. A sterile phrase, but it carried the proof that I was finally defining what could and could not cross my walls. That night, I sat at the dining table again. The candle's flame looked steadier here, less like a plea, more like a statement. I opened my laptop and drafted a letter to my attorney requesting the revocation of joint access to my estate. I paused before signing it. The cursor blinked, patient as a heartbeat. I thought of her, the daughter who once braided my hair before school plays, who now signed my name in secret. There had been so many small permissions, so many quiet nods that told her she could take without asking. No more. I signed the document, the same hand she had learned to mimic, and attached it to an email addressed to the courthouse. The timestamp marked 8:12 p.m. Minutes later, my phone buzzed. A message from him. "You're overreacting again. She was only trying to help. Maybe you need to talk to someone about these suspicions." I stared at the words until they blurred. The same tactic, the same tone. Gaslight disguised as concern. I placed the phone face down beside the candle and whispered, "You don't get to define reality anymore." The mirror across the room reflected the flame, doubling it. 2 lights, mine and the one I'd reclaimed. I took the therapy note and placed it beneath the candle, not to burn it, but to anchor it. Paper proof that boundaries, once written, could become law. Outside, the wind moved through the cracks of the old window, but the light didn't waver this time. I caught my reflection once more and didn't look away. The stakes were clear now. Either I protect what remains of my life, or I let them take even my sense of truth. I breathed in, steady and deliberate. The candle's glow touched my face, gentle but firm. The light in the mirror looked like armor. I saw them outside, smiling at my locked gate. The air that morning was colder than it should have been, the kind of cold that crept beneath clothes and into the bones. I'd left the curtains half open, a small act of defiance after weeks of watching shadows move behind them. And there they were, 2 figures in coats, familiar in the worst way. My daughter stood beside him, her father, both pretending it was an ordinary visit. He waved like nothing had happened. "We just came for a few things," he said. His voice carried easily through the iron bars. "Old files. Maybe the jewelry box. You don't mind, do you?" The words were smooth, practiced, every syllable shaped to sound harmless, but even from where I stood, I could see the way her hand curled around the latch as if she already knew it would open. "I do mind," I said quietly. "You don't belong here anymore." He laughed, a short, sharp sound that reminded me of the day the truth first cracked open. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be. We're family." Family? That word had started to rot. I lifted my phone, the red recording light blinking against the glass. "If you try to enter, it'll be trespassing." For a second, the smile slipped from her face. Then she forced it back. "You really want to call the police on your own blood?" "I already have." The silence that followed was the longest I'd ever heard from them. The cold wind scraped against the windows, and somewhere inside, the heater groaned like it, too, was tired of keeping me warm. The minutes stretched. My breath fogged the pain. A car turned the corner, lights flashing blue against the frost. 2 officers stepped out, hands resting on their belts, but eyes soft, weary. They'd seen families like this before. The taller one asked for details. I showed him the phone, the recording, the previous proof I'd gathered. "They don't live here," I said. "They lost that right months ago." He nodded, glancing toward the gate. "Ma'am, we'll issue a verbal warning today. Keep your distance, folks," he said to them. "If you come back, it becomes a report." "Report?" my ex repeated, smiling again. "You hear that? She's writing stories about us now." The officer's pen moved across a notepad, reference entry B22. I watched the ink sink into the paper, permanent and cold. They stood there a moment longer, staring at me like they were the ones betrayed. Then he whispered something to her, too soft to catch, and they both turned away, walking down the street as if they hadn't just tried to reclaim what wasn't theirs. The younger officer lingered by my door. "Lock everything, ma'am. Don't engage. People like that push boundaries till they break." "I know," I said. "I taught them how." When they left, I sank into the nearest chair, the phone still in my hand, the red light blinking out. The frost on the window had thickened during the commotion, veiling the world outside. I traced a line through it with my finger, watching the moisture gather at the tip. Across the street, the neighbor stepped out onto her porch, camera still in hand. She nodded once, her expression firm. Proof and witness rolled into one. I felt a strange comfort in knowing someone else had seen it happen, that the truth was no longer just mine to carry. I texted her, "Keep the footage safe." Her reply came seconds later, "Already done." I exhaled, letting the chills seep through my palms. It wasn't just the cold. It was the understanding that protection was conditional, fragile as the ice on glass. The law had drawn a line, but it was made of air, not steel. That night, I replayed the recording. The sound of their laughter filled the house like ghosts revisiting their favorite rooms. I thought of every small warmth that had once lived here, birthdays, breakfasts, the smell of cinnamon in the kitchen. Gone now, replaced by this emptiness that wore their faces. Still, something in me hardened. The stakes were no longer emotional. They were physical, legal, survival carved into paperwork. I had drawn my boundary, and though they smiled through it today, I knew the next time wouldn't be a warning. Outside, the temperature dropped further. The glass misted over again, sealing me in a world of breath and reflection. The frost on the window spelled their return. Every dollar they took had a heartbeat. Money was supposed to be numbers, neutral, cold, exact. But when betrayal stains it, even the ink smells human. The arbiter called that morning, his tone steady but low, as if speaking over the weight of truth. "I have the full ledger," he said. 5 withdrawals. Dates match your hospital stay. I closed my eyes. "Tell me the amounts." He hesitated. "You're sure?" "Say them." $4,600. $7,200, $9,000, $3,400, and one final. He paused. $24,200 total, all bearing your authorization code. My breath caught. I never authorized a thing. I know. The handwriting matches what we saw before. I imagined her hand moving across the page, slow, deliberate, confident. How many times had I taught her to write carefully, to take her time forming letters? The loops and curves that once spelled pride now signed away my life. He went on. The bank has already flagged it as internal fraud. They'll submit the report to the investigator this week. The words barely reached me. I was staring at the checkbook in front of me, open to a blank page. The scent of ink rose from it, sharp, metallic, familiar. It used to mean responsibility. Now it meant loss. I traced my finger down the margin. It's strange, I murmured, how something as simple as a pen can carry fingerprints of love and theft at once. Do you want me to pursue restitution? The arbiter asked. No, I said after a pause. Not yet. Let them think I'm still the fool. He sighed. This isn't about pride anymore. It's never been about pride, I said softly. It's about proof. After the call, I opened the safe. Inside were the remnants of what used to be security: folded papers, 2 watches, an old envelope labeled Insurance 2015. I ran my hand over the cool metal surface, the smell of dust and oil rising like memory. The safe had been the heart of the house once. Now it was just an autopsy drawer for everything they'd taken. The ledger arrived later that afternoon by courier. Inside the brown envelope was a printed document, Transaction Record Reference F31. The numbers were lined in perfect order, columns of greed dressed as precision. Beneath each withdrawal sat my name, signed neatly, lovingly forged. I read every line until the words blurred. The sound of the paper shifting became unbearable. I wanted to tear it, burn it, erase it. But I didn't. Instead, I folded it once and pressed it to my chest. Every dollar they took had come from something real: a birthday gift, a mortgage payment, a life quietly built over decades. I thought of the time she'd asked me for a small loan. Just until next week. I gave it without question. Now I wondered if that had been the first rehearsal for this. The phone rang again. The arbiter's voice was measured. They've confirmed the report was sent to the court investigator at 3:45 p.m. The institution will proceed. Will that stop them? For now, he said, but they'll find another door. I looked around the living room. The light had shifted, casting long streaks across the floorboards. The checkbook sat under it, glowing faintly in the pale gold of evening. It looked almost innocent again. I whispered to the empty air, "You turned paper into proof, but proof into pain." The house was silent except for the faint creak of the safe door, swinging slightly open. Inside, the ledger rested, its scent of ink and betrayal mingling with the faint perfume that still lingered on old letters. I slid the door shut, hearing the click echo through the room. The sound reminded me of a heartbeat. Measured, final. The stakes were no longer hidden behind family names or polite words. They were printed in black and white, notarized by deceit. The world now had evidence, but I had the wound. I sat beside the window, the frost from yesterday still etched at the edges of the glass. My reflections stared back, half-shadowed, half-lit. The faint smell of paper lingered in the air, refusing to fade. Their greed had my signature on every line. I wrote to her as a mother, not a witness. The pen felt heavier that night, as if every word carried its own weight of memory. The page before me stayed blank longer than usual, daring me to begin. I stared at it until the ink in the pen seemed to throb against my fingers, restless, waiting. "I don't know where to start," I whispered to no one. "Maybe that's why this letter will never be sent." The candle on the desk flickered, throwing small shadows across the paper. The scent of old ink mixed with wax and wood polish, a strangely comforting ache. I began slowly, like confessing to time itself. My dear girl. I used to think love could fix what silence ruined. I see now it only delayed the truth. I paused. The pen tip left a dark dot where my hand trembled. The words bled slightly into the grain of the paper, soft edges, blurred intentions. I am not writing to accuse you. I am writing because the sound of your laughter haunts me. I remember the day you forged my name. You said it was for convenience, but that word doesn't comfort me anymore. Each sentence came slower, steadier. I wonder if you understand what you took, not just money or trust, but the history that built both. You inherited more than property. You inherited conscience, and you spent it. The air in the room grew still, so still that I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator downstairs. The quiet pressed on me, heavy, patient. I thought of all the things I'd said aloud over the years that she had learned to ignore. This letter was everything I had not said. The phone buzzed once, a message from the therapist, the one who had become my reluctant protector. Don't send it yet. Let it breathe for a night. I set the pen down. It's not meant for her inbox, I said softly. It's meant for my survival. I kept writing anyway. I don't hate you. Hate would be simpler. I carry something sharper, the knowledge that you saw my wounds and used them to cut deeper. I raised you to be strong, but I didn't know strength could turn cruel. My eyes blurred, and I blinked hard, smearing a drop of ink with the side of my palm. One day, you'll read this. Not because I send it, but because life will return it to you in another form. A daughter of your own, maybe, or a silence you cannot fill. I signed my name, smaller than usual, as if even the letters were tired. The paper rippled faintly beneath my hand, the texture of grief made tangible. I folded it once, slid it into an envelope, and pressed a stamp into the corner. The stamp bore a winter rose, ironic given how little warmth survived between us. When I sealed it, I pressed harder than necessary, as though the act itself could close a wound. The next morning, I brought the letter to my therapist. She read it silently, eyes moving slowly, the faintest furrow between her brows. "This is good," she said at last. "It's truth, but truth doesn't always need a delivery address." She slipped it into a folder and marked it, sealed envelope reference H14. "I'll keep this in your file," she said. "Proof that love tried before anger did." I nodded, unable to speak. On the way home, I walked past the mailbox and almost dropped it in anyway. Almost. The metal slot gaped open like a mouth ready to swallow regret. I held the envelope tighter, feeling its weight, its pulse. The stakes had changed. It wasn't about punishment anymore. It was about dignity. Justice could wait. Forgiveness was not ready to be born. That night, I placed a copy of the letter inside my drawer, beside the ledger and the court documents. The ink had fully dried by then, the scent of it faint but persistent. I brushed my fingers across the envelope's edge. It was rough, uneven, human. I thought of her again, the child I once tucked into bed, the woman who now hid behind legal forms and silence. "I forgive the child," I whispered, "but not the choice." The clock ticked once, then stopped. The room fell quiet again, that hollow, breathless quiet that follows a confession no one hears. Ink dried, but forgiveness never did. I told my truth to a microphone that could not flinch. Its surface was cold beneath my fingertips, a perfect listener, silent, impartial, and unblinking. The studio lights hummed overhead, washing everything in sterile brightness. Beyond them, I could see the blurred silhouettes of the audience waiting, their murmurs low, curious, hungry for something real. The journalist leaned closer. "You don't have to use names," she said softly. "Just speak the truth." I nodded. The microphone caught even that faint motion, translating breath into evidence. The red light blinked on, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel like prey. I was betrayed, I began. Not by a stranger, by someone who shared my table. The words came slower than I expected. My voice carried the tremor of memory, but also a strange new strength. It began as love, the kind that forgives too easily. Then came the signatures, the excuses, the missing amounts. One day, I realized kindness had become currency, and I was bankrupt. The journalist didn't interrupt. She just watched, eyes steady. Somewhere behind her, a technician adjusted a dial, and the faint crackle of sound filled the air. It was like hearing my own heart echo back to me. The hardest part, I continued, wasn't the theft. It was the disbelief. People think financial abuse wears a mask of greed, but it doesn't. It wears a smile. It says, "You raised me, you trust me, just sign here." A whisper moved through the crowd. I let it settle. The microphone captured every pause, every breath that shook between sentences. They said I was confused, that my memory was failing, that the papers proved nothing. But the papers told a story they didn't want read aloud. The journalist leaned forward again. "What made you decide to speak publicly?" I looked at her, then at the small metal head of the microphone, gleaming under the light. Because silence protects the wrong side. I stayed quiet out of love. And love, when silent, becomes complicity. Her pen moved quickly over a notepad. "Do you want to send a message to others in your situation?" I exhaled. "Yes, to anyone listening. Your dignity isn't measured in forgiveness. If they took what you built, speak. The world only knows what we dare to say." The crowd stirred, then rose. Applause spread unevenly, hesitant at first, then stronger. The sound filled the space, echoing against the studio walls. It wasn't celebration, it was recognition. But even as they clapped, a chill passed through me. I had spoken truth into air, yet the one who needed to hear it most would stay silent. The journalist ended the segment, her voice poised and calm. "This testimony will be shared with the Social Services Oversight Board," she said quietly once the cameras dimmed. "It matters, what you did today." After the interview, she handed me a printed document, press clipping reference L09. "It'll be archived with your statement," she added. I held the paper, feeling the thin texture against my skin. Proof at last. Not the kind you file in drawers, but the kind that breathes. The words on the page were mine now, immutable. Outside the studio, the air smelled faintly of rain and asphalt. The witness, my steadfast neighbor, waited near the door. "You sounded like justice itself," she said. "I sounded terrified," I replied. "That's what truth sounds like at first." We walked to the car in silence. The headlights cut through puddles, scattering light across wet asphalt. In that glow, I saw the reflection of the microphone again. Small, metallic, unbending. Later that night, I sat alone in my kitchen, replaying the broadcast online. My voice filled the room, calm, but edged with something sharper. Resolve. The applause at the end blurred into static, then faded completely. I turned off the laptop and stared at the empty space where her chair used to be. For a moment, I imagined her sitting there, hearing every word. "The truth," I whispered, "doesn't wait for permission." The clock ticked once, the room returning to stillness. The world had finally heard my story, but she hadn't answered it. Her silence became the loudest reply. She arrived smiling, dressed in pity. The courtroom smelled faintly of polish and dust, that sterile scent of order pretending to be justice. I sat still on the wooden bench, palms resting flat, pulse steady. Across from me, she walked in wearing that same careful innocence she had perfected as a child. The arbiter sat between us, eyes like glass. "This is not a trial," he said. "It's mediation. Speak with respect." Respect. That word had become a kind of bruise. She began softly, her voice trembling just enough to feel rehearsed. "I didn't mean for things to go this far. Mom," she caught herself, "you misunderstood everything. I was under pressure. People manipulated me." The word manipulated echoed too perfectly, as though practiced before a mirror. I watched the light crawl across her face through the window, slicing it into truth and lie. For the first time, the divide showed. One half wept. The other watched itself perform. "I only took what I thought was mine," she continued. "You always said we shared everything. Why does that change now?" My throat tightened, but my voice stayed calm. "Because sharing ends when deceit begins." She looked down, hands trembling, an old gesture I used to believe. The arbiter unfolded a document, his tone even but merciless. "We received multiple statements, each with identical handwriting." He tapped the paper once, "all signed under your name." Her eyes widened. "That's not true." "It is," he said. "We cross-verified timestamps with digital transfers. Each movement occurred within 2 minutes of her hospital admission. Coincidence doesn't repeat itself 5 times." The light shifted again, hitting the polished floor and throwing a glare between us. She flinched, turning away. I didn't. For years, I'd been the one blinded by devotion. Now, I let the light expose what I had refused to see. "You forged them," I said quietly. Her tears came fast now, each one sliding down a face that once mirrored mine. "You don't understand. I had no choice." "There's always a choice," I said, "and you made yours in ink." The arbiter cleared his throat. "Enough. The matter proceeds to hearing, January 5th. He scribbled something at the top of his file, hearing transcript reference P28. The sound of the pen scratching the page felt like the sealing of fate. I looked down at the bench. My reflection shimmered faintly in its varnish, a warped image caught between the present and every sacrifice that led to it. I realized restraint had become my armor. Her performance depended on my collapse, but I refused to give her that encore. She tried one last angle. "You're my mother," she whispered. "Why are you doing this?" "I'm doing it because I am your mother," I said. "Because the truth is the only thing I have left to give you." For a long moment, the room was silent, except for the faint buzz of the overhead lights. The arbiter gathered the papers, his expression unreadable. My daughter stood slowly, wiping her face with the back of her hand, smearing mascara into dark lines. "Do you feel better now?" she asked. "No," I said. "Just finished." She turned to leave, her composure cracking as the door opened. Light spilled from the hallway, stark and unforgiving. The reflection in the window showed 2 women, one bare, one masked, and for the first time, I couldn't tell which of us looked more human. The arbiter closed the file. "You handled that with grace," he said softly. "Grace is just patience with a pulse," I replied. Outside, the afternoon light thinned, stretching long shadows across the courthouse steps. I walked past the cold marble columns, each echo of my footstep hollow and precise. The hearing would come, the crowd would gather, but in that moment, justice had already begun, not with judgment, but with exposure. I thought of her one last time, the girl who once hid behind my skirts, now hiding behind tears. I wished her peace, not forgiveness. Forgiveness still belonged to time. The sunlight touched the papers in my hand, and for a heartbeat, the ink seemed to shimmer, every lie preserved in permanence, every truth written beneath it, waiting to be seen. Her tears couldn't wash away the ink. The crowd's hush felt heavier than judgment. The courtroom was no longer a room. It was an arena. Flashbulbs burst like lightning across faces, journalists whispered into microphones, and even the air seemed to hold its breath. I could feel the vibration of 100 phones recording history that had once been my private heartbreak. The arbiter stood at the bench, his voice steady but resonant. "Case 119B, he announced. "Financial misappropriation under the authority of family court." Each syllable landed with precision, cutting through the murmurs that followed. Across the aisle, she sat beside her attorney, hands clasped, eyes lowered, posture rehearsed. Every movement of hers was careful now, as though control could be mistaken for innocence. A court officer handed the arbiter a stack of papers. He adjusted his glasses and began reading. Withdrawals totaling $24,200, distributed across 5 separate transactions, all time-stamped and verified under digital record reference R71. The sound of the words collided with the sound of memory. I remembered every check, every signature, the ink, the trust, the slow unraveling of years. A voice broke the silence. Reporter, perhaps. Was it proven? The arbiter raised his eyes briefly. Proven, recorded, and entered into the institutional ledger. A collective murmur rolled through the crowd like wind, shifting over leaves. The gavel struck once. The sharp crack filled the room. I flinched, not from fear, but from recognition. That sound had rhythm. It was the heartbeat of consequence. She knew what she was doing, the arbiter continued, his tone neither cruel nor kind. Each transaction aligned with personal access, falsified authorization, and deliberate concealment. Her lawyer tried to interject, stammering about duress, emotional manipulation, and coercion, but the words sounded paper-thin. There's context, he said, fumbling with his notes. Family context. The arbiter didn't look up. Context does not erase arithmetic. The crowd gasped. Someone scribbled frantically in the front row. Cameras clicked again, bright flashes that turned faces into silhouettes. I sat still, listening to the echo of the gavel inside my chest. A vow kept, I thought. I had promised myself I would not break in public, no matter how loud the truth became. Then came the sentence that ended the illusion. Probate suspension, effective immediately. All assets frozen until conclusion of review. It wasn't vengeance. It was validation, a formal acknowledgement that my silence had finally spoken louder than her lies. The arbiter signed the order, his pen scratching across the paper, a sound that seemed to rewrite the last 2 years of my life. He handed it to the clerk, who carried it toward the board at the far wall. Post it publicly, he said. Let the record reflect authority action. The clerk pinned the document against the notice board. The camera bulbs flared again, capturing the paper that now bore the mark of justice. Court order, reference R71. I watched her face pale as the crowd turned. For years, she had lived in the safety of my silence. Now, every whisper, every lens, every pen recorded her name beside mine, but not in the way she once imagined. Her lawyer leaned in, voice low, urgent. Don't react. Don't cry. They're filming. She nodded, but a single tear betrayed her discipline. It slid down her cheek, cutting a clean line through the foundation she wore like armor. Outside the windows, sunlight flashed against the glass. Harsh, unfiltered. It poured across the courtroom floor, striking the polished surface of the arbiter's gavel. Light refracted in brief, sharp bursts, like the truth itself demanding to be seen. He looked toward me. You've conducted yourself with composure, he said. That has weight in this court. I managed a small nod. Composure, I whispered, is what you learn when love collapses in public. The audience fell silent again. No one moved. Even the journalist who had been typing paused, his fingers hovering mid-air. For a long moment, the only sound was the soft hum of fluorescent lights and the echo of the last gavel strike. Justice, I realized, doesn't roar. It resonates. When the session ended, people rose slowly, some avoiding my gaze, others offering faint nods of respect. I gathered my papers, steady hands betraying the storm that lived underneath. As I turned to leave, I caught sight of her reflection in the courtroom's glass door, her face blurred by the glare. For a second, I remembered the girl who used to laugh freely, before ambition devoured innocence. The arbiter's voice broke through one last time. Court adjourned. The gavel struck. The sound was final, irreversible. The crowd began to murmur again, reporters rushing out to feed headlines, cameras flashing like electric applause. But I heard only one sound, the echo that replaced her laughter. The gavel's echo replaced her laughter. Noise lingered long after the verdict was read. It wasn't the sound itself that haunted me. It was the silence that followed it, thick and unsteady, like the air after a storm. The courthouse doors had barely closed before the world began to speak for me. Headlines, broadcasts, neighbors, strangers, each one finding a way to rewrite what had already been carved into record. By the next morning, my name was printed in black ink across the local paper. Inheritance scandal divides family. Court confirms fraud allegations. The witness left the clipping folded neatly on my doorstep. I could still smell the faint sweetness of candle wax on it, as if the story itself had been laid down beside a vigil flame. I sat at the kitchen table, the paper trembling in my hands. My reflection in the window looked older, not by years, but by truths spoken aloud. The phone started ringing early. Reporters, relatives, voices I hadn't heard in months. "We just want your comment," one said. "We want to know how you feel about justice." "I don't feel anything yet," I replied. Justice doesn't feel like triumph. It feels like air, thin and unfamiliar. Outside, I saw people gathering at the gate. Some offered nods of sympathy. Others simply stared. The same faces that once crossed the street to avoid gossip now lingered to taste it. The witness called later that day. "They're holding a vigil," she said. "For you." "For me?" "They say it's for truth, but they mean you." By dusk, the scent reached me before the light did, the heavy sweetness of burning wax. I stepped outside and saw the flicker of a dozen small flames lined along the sidewalk. Each candle reflected in the metal gate I once locked against intrusion. Children whispered questions their parents didn't answer. A man placed a folded newspaper beside the candles, its headline visible even in the half-dark. "Family greed exposed," it read. I stared at those words until the letters blurred. "They've turned pain into spectacle," I said softly. The witness sighed on the phone. "People need stories to feel righteous. You gave them one. Don't let it take more than it already has." Her voice steadied me. "Did they verify the transcript?" I asked. "Yes," she said. "The Media Ethics Board confirmed the recordings. The transcripts are authentic. It's official now." Official. The word had weight, neither comfort nor victory, just the solidity of fact. I thanked her and hung up. The candles outside burned lower, dripping molten wax into shallow puddles that caught the glow of the streetlight. I watched until the last one faltered. Inside, the house felt emptier than before. The walls absorbed the day's noise, leaving behind only a hum, faint but constant. I made tea, though I barely drank it. The air smelled faintly of smoke. Was it worth it? I asked myself aloud. Losing her to keep the truth? No answer came, only the echo of my own voice against the quiet. Later, as I folded the newspaper, I noticed a small ink stain on my fingertips. It reminded me of the courtroom documents, the signatures, the ledger, each mark a piece of evidence, each one a boundary drawn. Justice had spoken, but silence lingered longer. That night, I stood at the window watching the last wisp of smoke curl up from the street. The cold air carried it gently toward the stars before it vanished completely. The witness texted me a single line before midnight. "They're still talking, but tomorrow they'll move on." I stared at the screen for a long time. "Good," I whispered. "Let them." The house settled around me, quiet but alive. In that stillness, I realized the sound of truth wasn't applause or argument. It was endurance. Outside, one candle remained burning near the gate, its light trembling against the wind. The scent reached me again through the open crack in the window, faint, smoky, familiar. Truth smelled like smoke in the cold air. I kept the curtains open to prove I wasn't hiding. For months, those thin, white panels had been my shield, drawn tight whenever whispers gathered outside, whenever pity pressed its face against the glass, but now they hung wide, letting the daylight fall through unfiltered, as if truth itself had taken residence here. The morning the inspectors arrived, the house smelled faintly of lemon polish and paper. The protector had advised me to keep things simple. "Honesty doesn't need ornament," she'd said. Still, I caught myself aligning the pens on the desk, straightening the framed letter of case reference, S41. Old habits of order never really leave you, they just change meaning. Two officials stood in the doorway, polite smiles, neutral voices. "Routine welfare follow-up," one said, stepping inside. His clipboard gleamed under the sunlight. "We'll only need a few minutes." "Take all the time you need," I replied. My voice didn't shake. They moved through each room, jotting notes, observing the ordinary: clean floors, labeled drawers, unbroken calm. One of them paused at the window. "Bright in here," she said softly. "I leave them open," I told her. "People assume shame prefers the dark." She nodded, almost approvingly, and continued her inspection. I watched her silhouette move through the sunlight, its warmth steady against the cool edges of the walls. That light became my anchor, the same one that once mocked me through frosted glass during court hearings. Now it was proof of my own visibility, the kind that no verdict could revoke. The protector arrived halfway through, her clipboard heavier than mine, but her smile lighter. "You've done everything right," she murmured. "You've turned your home into evidence of peace." "Peace feels strange," I said. "It's too quiet." "Quiet isn't guilt," she answered. "It's survival learning how to breathe." One inspector asked to see my medication log. I handed him the small notebook, the same one that had once held the first trembling notes of betrayal. Its pages now bore steadier handwriting. Meals tracked, phone calls logged, therapy appointments completed. He flipped through it quickly, nodding. Consistent, verified. Those words, simple, clinical, sounded more healing than any apology could. As they moved toward the exit, the sunlight reached across the floor, brushing over the last of their shadows. The older inspector turned back once more. "You've rebuilt well," he said. "That isn't easy." "No," I said quietly, "but it's necessary." The protector signed the final page on her report. "Case closed," she said, tapping the file. "Resolved, verified." The stamp hit the paper with a muffled thud, and in that sound, something unknotted inside me. When they left, I didn't close the door right away. I stood there listening to the faint hum of cars beyond the street, to the rhythm of a life returning. The sunlight fell across the floorboards like a silent witness, revealing the grain, the imperfections, the texture of endurance. I walked to the window and touched the curtain fabric, thin cotton, pale, almost translucent. For years I had used it to conceal. Today, it framed the proof that I was still here. The protector called from the driveway. "You don't have to keep them open forever," she said. "I know," I replied, "but today I want the world to see what survived." She smiled, nodded once, and drove away. The sound of her car faded into the distance, leaving only birdsong and the ticking of the wall clock. I sat at my desk and uncapped a pen, the ink flowing smoothly onto fresh paper. Not testimony this time, just reflection. For the first time in months, I wrote without an audience in mind. Outside, the afternoon sun shifted slightly, changing angles but not intent. It found the spaces between curtain threads and poured through, steady and forgiving. I closed my notebook, breathed in the quiet, and let it stay. Sunlight stayed, even when they didn't. Numbers finally stood for truth, not theft. The statement arrived in a crisp white envelope, its seal unbroken, its weight unmistakable. For months, every letter had carried anxiety, accusation, or threat. But this one felt different. I could tell by the texture of the paper alone. It was heavier, calmer, as though justice itself had chosen proper stationery. Inside, a single page. The words were spare, bureaucratic, and yet beautiful. Refund processed, $24,200. Case reference T72. The number that had once represented deceit now bore the shape of redemption. I held the check between my fingers, tracing the raised print of the seal. The ink shimmered faintly under the light, and for a fleeting second I thought I could feel the heartbeat of every sleepless night pressed into its surface. When the arbiter called, his voice carried the relief of a long campaign finally complete. "It's done," he said. "Full restitution," and the court issued an additional clause, partial allocation to the Elder Victims Trust Fund. "To charity?" I asked. "Yes, symbolic repayment. It's rare, but it fits the case." I looked down at the numbers again. "So, they'll use what was stolen to protect others." He paused. "Exactly. That's how the ledger balances, in spirit, not just arithmetic." I smiled, not out of victory but peace. "Thank you," I said quietly. "You kept me steady when I was breaking." "Steady doesn't mean unhurt," he replied. "But you did something few people manage. You stayed truthful long enough for the system to listen." After the call, I laid the check flat on the table. The house was silent except for the faint tick of the clock, a sound that no longer mocked me. The afternoon sun poured through the curtains, catching the edge of the paper. For months, I'd feared this light. Now, it felt like a witness. I remembered the courtroom, the voices, the betrayal that came wrapped in family titles and empty apologies. "It's not about the money," they had said, and it wasn't. But the money had carried the lie. Now, it carried its undoing. I folded the check into its envelope and sealed it, pressing my thumb over the adhesive. The seal's coolness grounded me. It felt like closure made tangible. Later that evening, I walked to the mailbox outside the local bank branch. The same institution that once questioned my sanity now bore my proof on file. The clerk, a young man with uncertain kindness, recognized me as I entered. "Ma'am," he said gently, "we received confirmation from the court this morning. The refund's cleared. Congratulations." "Thank you," I replied. "It's not really mine anymore." He looked confused. "You're donating it?" "Yes. The court ordered half toward the Elder Victims Trust Fund. The rest, I'll use to fix the roof." I gave a faint smile. "Justice shouldn't leak." He laughed softly, nodding. "I like that." As I left, I caught my reflection in the glass door. Steady posture, unguarded eyes. For the first time, I didn't see a woman defending herself. I saw someone finished with defense altogether. Back home, I opened my notebook and wrote one final line beneath the last entry. "Case closed, February 2nd. The pen glided smoothly, the ink dark and deliberate. There was no tremor this time, no hesitation. For a long moment, I just sat there, watching the ink dry, feeling its calm permanence. I thought of all the nights I had measured my worth against receipts, balances, and signatures. Every page of that ledger had once been a weapon. Now it was a record of endurance. I ran my fingers across the paper's surface one last time. The texture felt cool, clean, like the skin of something reborn. Then I placed the notebook in a drawer and closed it gently. The quiet that followed didn't ache anymore. It settled. Some debts, I realized, are paid not in dollars, but in dignity restored. Ink finally matched intention. Her chair remained empty, but not haunting. For a long time, I'd feared that emptiness, that still shape at the head of the table, carved by memory and grief. But today, it wasn't a wound. It was an echo softened by forgiveness. The morning light came in gently through the curtains, less like an intrusion, more like an invitation. I sat at the same table where everything began. The wood had lost its polish, but not its story. There were faint marks where her hands once rested, small impressions that no cloth could erase. I used to trace them with resentment. Now I trace them to remember what survival costs. The family photo rested beside the vase. Its corner was bent, the colors slightly faded. In that frozen image, her smile was too composed to be honest. I touched the frame, brushing away the dust. It caught the light, just once, then settled. She would have wanted this calm, I said softly, to no one. The witness arrived not long after. She carried a small envelope and a kind of quiet that made conversation unnecessary. "You've rearranged the room," she said, looking around. "Only what needed moving," I replied. "The rest belongs where it stayed." She nodded, her gaze landing on the empty chair. "You didn't replace it." "No," I said. "Some absences shouldn't be filled." We sat in silence for a moment. Outside, the world carried on. Children walking to school, a dog barking in rhythm with the passing hour. Inside, everything slowed. The witness placed the envelope on the table. "It's from the paper," she said. I opened it carefully. Inside was a single clipping from the local newspaper. "Healing After Harm, One Woman's Path to Closure." Beneath it, a short paragraph described resilience, justice, and the courage to speak. No names, no spectacle, just truth, finally allowed to stand on its own. I smiled faintly. "They left her out of it," I murmured. "They had to," the witness said. "The story isn't about her anymore." I folded the clipping and tucked it beneath the photo frame. The glass reflected both images, the public headline and the private history, merging into something strangely whole. "She hurt you deeply," the witness whispered. "I know," I said, "but hate only keeps the wound open. Forgiveness. It's how I closed it." "You think she'd understand?" "No," I answered. "And that's all right." The light shifted across the table again, warmer now. Dust floated in its path, catching small glints before vanishing. It was the same light that once fell harshly through courtroom windows, the same that pierced through drawn curtains when I couldn't bear to be seen. But now it stayed, steady, patient, forgiving. The witness reached out and rested her hand lightly over mine. "You're seen," she said. Something inside me eased at those words. Seen, not for the pain, but for the endurance that came after it. "I thought peace would feel loud," I said after a moment. "Triumphant, maybe, but it's quiet, almost fragile." She smiled. "Quiet isn't fragile. It's earned." We both looked toward the chair again. For the first time, I didn't imagine her sitting there. I imagined nothing at all, and that somehow felt like freedom. When the witness left, I stayed seated a while longer. The photo gleamed once more before the light began to fade. I breathed in slowly, letting the air fill every corner of that room, every space that grief once owned. The clock ticked twice, measured, calm, final. I rose, folded the napkin, and placed it neatly beside the empty plate. Peace didn't announce itself. It simply arrived, took its place, and waited to be noticed. Peace looked exactly like the first betrayal undone. This time, I poured the tea myself. The sound of the liquid meeting porcelain was softer than I remembered, steady, deliberate, almost reverent. Morning light spilled across the table, the same table that once held silence like a sentence. Now it held peace. The teapot felt different in my hand, lighter, though it hadn't changed in weight. Maybe it was me who had. The curtains fluttered in the gentle wind. The house, once haunted by arguments and whispered accusations, had learned how to breathe again. I could hear the kettle settle on the stove, the faint hum of its cooling metal marking the rhythm of a quiet day. There was a time I couldn't sit in this room without feeling her absence like a wound. The chair opposite me had been her place, the place where betrayal had disguised itself as love. Now, it was just furniture, no longer a shrine to what went wrong. The protector stopped by earlier. She didn't stay long, just enough to leave a note and a smile. "You don't need us anymore," she'd said, her eyes soft. "That's what victory looks like." After she left, I opened my journal, the one marked reference VF5. The last entry stared back at me. "Tomorrow, I will make tea without trembling." I smiled. Tomorrow had come. I lifted the cup, breathed in its warmth. The scent carried a faint trace of jasmine, familiar yet new. For months, bitterness had been the taste I'd come to expect. resentment steeped longer than forgiveness. But today, the sweetness lingered, unexpected and true. "Funny," I whispered, "how healing tastes ordinary." The sunlight shifted, stretching across the table and landing on the photo frame beside the pot. Her face looked softer in that light, almost human again. No longer the shadow of what she did, just a memory contained by time. I didn't flinch. I didn't turn it away. There's a peculiar peace in realizing you survived the story someone else tried to write for you. All the papers, hearings, signatures, they belong to another kind of closure. But this, the act of pouring tea for myself, this was the one that mattered. For a moment, I closed my eyes and listened. To the silence, to the hum of the refrigerator, to the faint creak of the floor as the house settled. Every sound that once echoed loneliness now sounded like life continuing. "Would you like some tea?" I found myself saying aloud, out of habit. Then, smiling faintly, I added, "No need, I've got it." I took a slow sip, the warmth spreading through me like an answer I had waited years to hear. In the reflection on the teapot, I could see the light bending, changing shape. Once, I would have searched that reflection for what was missing. Now, I only saw what remained. I remembered every storm that had passed through this house, every slammed door, every letter, every courtroom glare. They had been loud, destructive, final. But healing arrived quietly, without ceremony, in the small act of pouring, tasting, accepting. Outside, a bird landed on the windowsill. Its wings caught the sunlight just as I looked up. The light lingered, soft but certain, and for the first time, I didn't reach to close the curtains. The teacup was nearly empty when I set it down. I didn't refill it. Some things are complete only once. I leaned back, the warmth still on my lips, and let the stillness hold me. No papers to sign, no phone calls to make, just breath and light and tea cooling on the table. Sweetness on my tongue was truth.